Imagine you are 17 years old. Your father is a senator. Your marriage has been arranged to a consul's son. Tonight is your wedding feast. The garden glows with oil lamps. Musicians play softly near the fountain. Your new husband smiles nervously across the table. Everything feels like the beginning of something safe. Then the emperor arrives. Unannounced. Uninvited. Unwanted. Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, called Caracalla by history, sweeps through your gate with his Praetorian guard. He is 24 years old. His eyes move across the room like a merchant counting inventory. When they settle on you, your mother's hand tightens on your arm. Your father stands, smiling, pretending this is an honor. Your husband says nothing. He has already learned what everyone in Rome knows. When the emperor wants something, refusal is not survival. Before midnight, your wedding night will belong to someone else. Before dawn, your marriage will be a performance built on silence. And before the week ends, you will understand why senators' daughters disappear into villas outside the city and never speak of what happened inside the palace walls. This is not myth. This is not slander from Caracalla's enemies. This is documented in the histories of Cassius Dio, in the private letters of Roman families, in the legal complaints buried in archives that later emperors tried to burn. 5 atrocities defined Caracalla's court. 5 practices so disturbing that even Rome, a culture built on conquest and domination, whispered about them in horror. If the hidden darkness of Imperial Rome fascinates you, subscribe to Reckoning History, hit the like button, and once you reach the moment that unsettles you most, tell me where you're watching from. Let's begin. You are Julia Lucia, daughter of Senator Gaius Lucretius. Your wedding feast is underway. We enter the moment Caracalla arrives at your home. The garden falls silent. Praetorian guards position themselves at exits. The emperor does not ask permission. He sits at your table, drinks your wine, and watches you with an expression that makes your skin crawl. We explore the historical context. Caracalla ruled from 198 to 217 AD, first with his father Septimius Severus, then alone after murdering his brother Geta. Ancient sources describe him as paranoid, brutal, and obsessed with Alexander the Great. But they also describe something else. A pattern of behavior toward women that went beyond the usual imperial privilege. Cassius Dio, a contemporary senator and historian, wrote that Caracalla took pleasure in violating the marriages of prominent men. This chapter establishes the setting, the power dynamics, and the moment when you realize your wedding night will not be your own. Sensory details ground the scene. The smell of roasted meat turning sour in your stomach, the sound of your husband's forced laughter, the weight of silk suddenly feeling like chains. The feast ends. Caracalla does not leave. He announces he will bless your marriage personally. Your father's face drains of color, but he bows. Your husband looks at the floor. This is the first atrocity, the imperial rite of first night, never formally codified in law but practiced with impunity by Caracalla. We examine how this differed from provincial customs. In the provinces, commanders sometimes claimed conquered brides. In Rome, the emperor claimed the brides of his own citizens, his own supporters, his own court. The Historia Augusta mentions this practice obliquely, calling it interference in senatorial marriages. Dio is more direct. He took women from their husbands on their wedding nights. We follow you into the wedding chamber. Your husband is dismissed. Guards stand outside the door. Caracalla enters alone. The violation is not described graphically but through absence, through silence, through the morning after when you sit motionless while servants prepare your hair and pretend nothing happened. This was systematic. Historians estimate dozens of senatorial families experienced this humiliation. The emperor kept no records. The families kept silent. Only the whispers survived. 3 days after your wedding, you are summoned to the palace. Not as a guest. As a resident. This is the second atrocity, the forced retention of women in the imperial household. Caracalla did not simply violate marriages and leave. He kept the women. Your husband receives a letter. The emperor requires your presence for court functions. The language is polite. The meaning is clear. You are not coming home. We explore the palace structure, the Domus Augustana on the Palatine Hill, its labyrinthine corridors, its inner chambers where women lived in gilded captivity. Some were called companions. Some were called attendants. All were called property. Letters from this period, preserved in Egyptian papyri, mention women writing to their families begging for intervention. The families rarely responded. To challenge the emperor was to invite destruction. You meet other women in the palace. Claudia, taken from her wedding 6 months ago. Emilia, whose husband divorced her the day after Caracalla summoned her, claiming she had dishonored him by obeying. Marcella, who tried to refuse and watched her father's estate confiscated within a week. They teach you the rules. Obey. Smile. Survive. Hope the emperor grows bored before he grows cruel. The third atrocity took place in the baths of Caracalla, the massive public complex the emperor built to immortalize his name. But there were private baths within the complex. Baths where senators' wives were brought to entertain the emperor and his guests. We shift perspective here to Tertia, a woman mentioned in Dio's histories as having endured the emperor's revels. The baths were settings for orgies that blurred the line between entertainment and assault. Women were stripped, oiled, and paraded before military commanders, foreign dignitaries, and sycophantic courtiers. Dio writes that Caracalla forced women of quality to perform acts that courtesans would refuse. The architecture of the bath still stands today. Archaeologists have identified the private chambers, small rooms with drains in the floor, ventilation shafts, locks on the outside of doors. The stones remember what history tried to forget. Tertia survives the night. But her husband, a respected jurist, files a complaint with the Senate. The Senate ignores it. 3 weeks later, the husband is accused of treason. He is executed. His property is seized. Tertia is returned to the palace. The message is received. Silence or death. Most choose silence. The fourth atrocity was economic. Caracalla began auctioning the marriages of senators' daughters to the highest bidder, keeping the payment for himself. This was not traditional matchmaking. This was trafficking dressed as policy. We follow Livia, 14 years old, daughter of a senator who criticized the emperor's wars. She is brought before Caracalla's treasurer. Her marriage is sold to a Syrian merchant for 50,000 denarii. She has never met him. He is 53 years old. He owns brothels in Anch. The sale is recorded in imperial accounts discovered in the 19th century. The notation reads, marriage transfer, Livia Severa, 50,000 denarii, paid to imperial treasury. Her father cannot refuse without losing his seat, his wealth, his life. Livia is shipped to Syria like cargo. She writes one letter home. It reaches Rome 6 months later. The handwriting is shaky. The message is brief, I am still alive. Her father burns the letter. Some things cannot be saved. Only mourned. This practice funded Caracalla's military campaigns. Young women became revenue. Their bodies, their futures, converted to coins that paid soldiers who would later sack cities and create more captives, more revenue, more imperial power built on suffering. The fifth atrocity extended beyond the emperor himself. Caracalla granted his Praetorian Guard permission to claim women from households they protected. This created a system where soldiers could demand access to any woman in any home under the guise of security. We meet Valeria, wife of a merchant. Praetorians are stationed outside her home after her husband is accused of hoarding grain during a shortage. The accusation is false, but the guards remain. One night, the captain enters her home. He does not ask permission. He cites imperial privilege. Her husband is outside, held at sword point by the other guards. Valeria's screams are ignored by neighbors who have learned that intervening brings the guards to your door next. The Praetorians operated with absolute impunity. They were the emperor's personal army, loyal only to whoever paid them. Caracalla increased their wages and decreased their oversight. The result was a reign of terror inside Rome itself. Women could not walk streets safely. Marriages were violated openly. Complaints were treated as treason. By 217 AD, Roman families were fleeing to estates in the countryside, abandoning the capital to avoid the emperor's court and the soldiers who served it. Why did no one stop him? This chapter examines the institutional collapse that enabled Caracalla's atrocities. The Senate, once the power center of Rome, had become a theater of fear. Senators who spoke against the emperor disappeared. Their families were destroyed. Their names were erased from public records, a practice called Damnatio Memoriae. We explore specific cases: Senator Papinianus, the great jurist, executed for refusing to justify Caracalla's murder of his brother. Senator Letus, killed for defending his daughter's honor. Senator Silo, forced to watch his wife taken to the palace and then thanked publicly for his loyalty. The Senate met. They passed resolutions praising Caracalla. They funded his building projects. They endorsed his wars. And they said nothing about the women. Cassius Dio was a senator during this period. He survived by silence. His histories, written later, are filled with barely concealed rage. "We endured indignities no free men should suffer," he wrote, "and watched our families destroyed while we applauded." The Senate's silence was not consent. It was cowardice. But it was also survival. And that is the tragedy at the heart of this story. Not all women submitted silently. This chapter honors the women who resisted and the terrible prices they paid. Pomponia Graecina, who wore mourning clothes to court as protest and was placed under house arrest for life. Cornelia Severa, who smuggled letters to other cities describing Caracalla's abuses, letters that were intercepted, leading to her execution for spreading sedition. Antonia, who poisoned herself rather than enter the palace, leaving a note that read, "I will not be counted among his collection." Her suicide was ruled a crime. Her estate was confiscated. Her husband was exiled. Even in death, she was punished. We also examine the attempted conspiracy of 213 AD, when several senators' wives allegedly planned to assassinate Caracalla during a public games. The plot was discovered before it began. 8 women were executed. Their children were sold into slavery. Their husbands were forced to witness the executions and then thank the emperor for his mercy in not killing them too. Resistance was not futile. It was worse than futile. It was used as justification for further brutality. And yet, the resistance continued in small, invisible ways that left no monuments but preserved dignity in the darkest moments. This chapter is built on primary sources. Letters written by women during Caracalla's reign, preserved by accident in Egyptian papyri, archived correspondence, hidden records. We read their words directly. A wife writing to her sister, "Do not let your daughter marry into a senatorial family. The emperor's attention is a death sentence." A mother writing to her son in the legions, "Your wife has been summoned to the palace. We do not expect her return." A daughter writing to her father, "I have done what you asked. I have survived. But I am not the girl you knew." These letters were never meant to be historical documents. They were private grief, private rage, private attempts to explain the inexplicable. They were hidden, lost, rediscovered centuries later by archaeologists who initially dismissed them as forgeries because the content seemed too dark to be real. Modern analysis confirmed their authenticity. The ink is period correct. The papyrus dates to the early 3rd century. The handwriting matches other documents from senatorial families. The letters are real. The suffering was real. And the silence that followed was deliberate erasure. On April 8, 217 AD, Caracalla was assassinated while urinating on the side of a road during a campaign in Parthia. His killer was a Praetorian soldier named Marcellus, whose brother Caracalla had recently executed. The assassination was likely orchestrated by Macrinus, the Praetorian prefect who succeeded Caracalla as emperor. When news reached Rome, the Senate erupted in applause. Dio records that senators openly celebrated, some weeping with relief. The women of the court were freed immediately. Some returned to their families. Some refused, knowing their families would not accept them back. Some had nowhere to go. Their marriages were dissolved. Their reputations destroyed. Freedom meant homelessness for many. We follow Julia Lucia, from the opening chapter, as she returns to her father's house. He greets her formally, coldly. Her husband has remarried. Her dowry is gone. She is housed in a separate wing of the estate, away from guests, away from public view. She is free but not forgiven. The stain of the palace follows her. This was the fate of survivors. Not vindication. Not justice. Just the opportunity to live quietly in the shadows and try to forget what cannot be forgotten. After Caracalla's death, Rome tried to forget. His statues were torn down. His name was chiseled off monuments. His policies were reversed. But the women were erased even more thoroughly. The Senate passed no resolutions honoring survivors. No monuments were built to the women who suffered. No compensation was offered to families. Instead, a strange silence settled over Rome. Historians writing decades later mentioned Caracalla's cruelty but avoided details about his treatment of women. Christian writers later blamed the women themselves, claiming they must have been willing participants in pagan debauchery. Medieval scholars dismissed the accounts as exaggerations designed to make Caracalla look bad. By the Renaissance, the stories had been softened into vague references to moral corruption. The truth became rumor. Rumor became myth. Myth became dismissal. We examine why this happened. Sexual violence is easy to erase from history. It leaves no ruins. It builds no roads. Victims often cannot speak. Witnesses choose not to. And later generations prefer stories of glory to stories of shame. The erasure was not accidental. It was systematic. Because to remember these women would require Rome to confront what it had allowed. And empires do not like to confront their complicity. We end where we began. With you, the reader, imagining what it meant to live through this moment in history. The archaeological evidence still exists. The baths Caracalla built still stand, massive and beautiful, tourists walking through chambers that once held horrors. The Imperial archives in Istanbul contain fragments of marriage records, auctions, transfers. The papyri from Egypt preserve desperate letters that were never meant to survive. In 2003, archaeologists excavating near the Palatine Hill discovered a mass grave. 12 female skeletons, all young, all showing signs of malnutrition and healed fractures. Buried without ceremony. Without names. Carbon dating placed them in the early 3rd century. DNA analysis showed they came from different regions: Greece, North Africa, Gaul. They were brought to Rome. They died in Rome. They were forgotten in Rome. Until now. This chapter is the reckoning history demanded. We name the women where we can. Julia Lucia. Tertia. Livia. Valeria. Pomponia. Cornelia. Antonia. We honor the unnamed. We acknowledge the system that consumed them. We recognize that empires are built on more than military conquest. They are built on the bodies of the powerless. On the silence of witnesses. On the deliberate forgetting of crimes too uncomfortable to remember. Caracalla's 5 atrocities defined his court. But they also defined Rome's willingness to look away. To prioritize power over justice. Stability over truth. The empire survived. The women did not. If you want to honor their memory, leave a name in the comments. Any name of a woman history tried to erase. From any era. Any place. Let this be the memorial they never received.